All right, we're here for the Lay Them to Rest book giveaway. I have a bunch of numbers in a hat that I assigned everybody who emailed me. And I have two big helpers today, Graham and Beckett, to help me do the drawing.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, who wants to pick the number first? We have two books to give away, so I need someone to pick a number first. Who's going to do it first?
I don't want to give away my book.
No,
It's not-
Beckett. Beckett, it's a book we...
It's not your book. You don't have to
Yeah.
give away your book. I'll give away my book. Here, just pick any number you like. Which one's that? What's it say?
17.
Ooh, that means Nikki is the winner of one of the books. I will be emailing Nikki to get her address. And now we have Graham to pick the next number. Shake him up a little bit.
I have got 116.
116. Let me find out who that is. And that one is Leanne. So Nikki and Leanne, I will be sending you emails to let you know that you have won.
Good
Thank you, boys, for
job.
your help.
Bye, you're welcome.
Thank you, Beckett.
Beckett, say you're welcome.
You're welcome.
In 1998, 3 people participated in the same crime but had different consequences. Did the different sentences fit each person's circumstances, or was the system unfair? I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Welcome to Crimelines and the start of the 12 Days of Crimelines, where I release 12 daily episodes as a thank you to everyone for supporting me and the show all year round. I want to give a huge thank you to Haley Gray again for her research assistance on this one. I knew the only way I would get anywhere near the 12 Days of Crimelines this year was to call in backup. And Haley is such a good friend and a researcher that she answered my cries. This case today is out of Florida, and we're going to start with Vicki Lynn Klug, who was born in 1948 in Harbor, Michigan. She was the second of 4 children born to Art and Donna, and she was particularly close to her older sister. Vicki got her bachelor's degree with plans to become a teacher initially, so she took some grad school classes towards that at Michigan State University. At some point, she moved to Florida and married Chuck Robinson in 1980. The marriage lasted 14 years before Chuck and Vicki divorced, with Vicki retaining primary custody of their 2 daughters, Michelle and Valessa, who were 13 and 11 at the time. Now, divorce is hard on kids, we know that, but it was even harder on the girls when Chuck left the state for work. Michelle and Vicki were very close, whereas Valessa was closer to Chuck, so she probably felt his absence the most, and Vicki, now a single mom, worked a lot as a real estate agent, and she wasn't as accessible. She was also very active in her church, and she volunteered with the local Head Start program, as well as socializing and dating. She had a lot going on, parenting 2 girls by herself while maintaining a career, yet something she's noted for is always having a positive outlook, and she was the first one to check in on someone else when they needed something. After the divorce, Vicki met a man named Jim, and the two just clicked. He loved how happy and upbeat she was. In some ways, Vicki was really thriving, but Valessa was not. She had always been free-spirited, but this was a big change in her life, and it led to her acting out, and that quickly spiraled. Vicki was at a loss as to how best to parent her, and she made some unconventional choices in what she permitted. For instance, Valessa wanted to join a rock band when she was 12. Vicki allowed it in spite of the other band members being 20-something-year-old men. Allowing this extracurricular activity definitely sounded strange to me, but I think the reason may have had to do with Valessa's struggles in school. She would get picked on because she didn't quite fit in with the other kids, so maybe Vicki was thinking that if she could find her thing outside of school and outside of her peer group, maybe that would actually help her. But letting a middle schooler hang out with older bandmates meant Valessa was actually exposed to things she wasn't quite ready for, which included drug use. When Valessa was about 13, she started trying things like acid, and she would just not come home at night, she'd skip school, and she was just generally doing what she wanted. According to one of Vicki's coworkers, Vicki tried everything with Valessa. She would try to love on her, she would try tough love, but nothing she did seemed to change things. According to Vicki's boyfriend Jim, Valessa was just beyond discipline and thought she could do whatever she wanted. But others thought that Vicki just wasn't present enough for any of her methods to work. One of Valessa's friends said that she was never around, and Valessa's father, Chuck, told CBS about a vacation Vicki took when Valessa was 14. It was supposed to be a family trip back to Michigan, but when Valessa refused to go, Vicki said, "Fine, stay home." And she did, for 2 weeks. According to Chuck, Vicki didn't call to check on her. So now which is it? Was Vicki the mom who tried everything with her unruly daughter, or was she checked out and more involved in her own life? I'm going to say that the answer was probably both at different times. Think about how hard it must have been to be a single mom with a rebellious child. And I'm not just talking about talking back or even sneaking out at night. Valessa was using drugs. I think Vicki may have been checked out at times, not because she didn't care, but because she was freaking exhausted. Valessa started a journal in February of 1995 when she was 11, and it gives us a glimpse into the path she was on. The first entry, as reported in the Tampa Bay Times, was about a boy who would look at her during choir practice and how she thought he might like her, like very typical 6th grader stuff. And there were other entries, even as Valessa got older, about boys she liked and hanging out with friends. But then there would also be her thoughts on the trouble she would get into, which included drugs, vandalism, shoplifting, running away, and eventually sex. It was in October of 1997, when Valessa was 14, that she was introduced to Adam Davis through a friend. Adam was an 18-year-old drug dealer with the street name Rattlesnake. Adam did have a hard life. He was born in late 1978, and his mother left when he was 2. When he was 13, his father died in a motorcycle wreck, and from then on, Adam was shuffled between relatives, living in 3 states over the next 4 years before he returned to Tampa. Having dropped out of high school, Adam turned to theft and later selling drugs. In 1995 alone, when he was 17, he was arrested 6 times, all for theft-related crimes. In 1997, the same year he met Valessa, he pleaded guilty for stealing a motorcycle and burglary. Right after meeting Valessa, Adam was arrested on a number of charges. He and a friend were squatting in an abandoned house that they had broken into as they had nowhere else to live. They were found in that house with stolen items, including a taser. This led to a trespassing charge being upgraded to armed trespassing, and long story short, he was found guilty of charges like grand theft, burglary, and criminal trespassing. Adam ended up sentenced to 6 months in jail. Obviously, Vicki was not a fan of this new friend. He was not just 4 years older, but he had this extensive criminal history. However, he got convicted and sent to jail shortly after they met, so it wasn't an immediate issue. As someone who has raised multiple teenagers, I know that I would think 6 months apart would help temper this situation and growing infatuation. But it didn't. Valessa's feelings towards Adam were intense, almost obsessive. On May 11th, 1998, shortly after Adam got out of jail, Valessa wrote in her diary that Adam Davis was her one true love, and soon she would be Valessa Davis. She wrote that they had sex 8 times since he had gotten out, and they were trying to get pregnant. She admitted to her diary, at least, that he wasn't exactly father material, writing that he stole things and he drank excessively, and he struggled with suicidal ideation, but she still loved him. Vicki didn't know what to do about the situation, especially after Valessa, with Adam's help, ran away from home. The police arrested Adam and charged him with child abuse in relation to this. And that was a turning point for Vicki. She didn't want to forbid Valessa from seeing Adam because that would only push Valessa towards him more. But doing nothing and hoping the relationship would pass also didn't work. Vicki started taking Valessa to counseling for both of them, and then she started looking at more intensive treatment options for Valessa. She finally decided on a Christian residential school called Stepping Stone Farms, located not far outside of Tampa. This wasn't unlike other reform schools in that they used their religious affiliation to avoid state oversight, but it was a school that advertised that they did not use corporal punishment. But they did, until their closure, require a full 1-year commitment, so Valessa would be away from her friends and Adam for that entire year. She was scheduled to start just after the 4th of July. Valessa very likely didn't know she was going, let alone that she would have to stay there for a year. It is typical with schools like this for the parents not to tell the children ahead of time. Some people who have gone to these type of reform schools, like Paris Hilton, have reported thinking that they were being kidnapped when strangers showed up in the middle of the night and more or less forced them out of the house. But even when they didn't use secure transport like that, the teens would often just be dropped off by their parents with no idea ahead of time that that's where they were going. It seems like as far as Valessa knew, she was on break from school all summer. She had a part-time job at McDonald's while her 17-year-old sister opted to visit their father in Missouri. 10 days before Valessa was scheduled to start at the new school on Friday, June 26, 1998, Valessa was 15 and she was spending time with Adam, who was now 19. And they had another 19-year-old friend with them named John Wispel. He had been with Adam when he was squatting in that house and was also arrested, but because he didn't have a criminal record like Adam, he got 3 years probation instead of being locked up. The three spent some of the day with Vicki, running errands. She was pretty much at the point where she was just going along to get along with Valessa until she started that residential program. At some point, they split up and Vicki went home to have dinner with her boyfriend, Jim. Around 11:20 p.m., Valessa came home with Adam and John, and they went to Valessa's bedroom. Jim was getting ready to head home about 10 minutes later, or so 11:30 or so, and he offered to drive Adam and John back to where they were staying. They turned down the offer, instead leaving on their bicycles. The next day, Jim tried to get in touch with Vicki. They were supposed to go to the beach that afternoon to enjoy some time together, but Vicki never reached out to finalize the plans. Jim went out to her house to see what was going on, but no one was home and Vicki's van was gone. That evening, after he learned Vicki had also missed appointments with clients that morning, he called the police to ask for a welfare check. An officer did make entry into the home, and he didn't find any trace of Vicki or Valessa. But Vicki's bed was unmade, which was unusual for her. She was very organized, and her house was immaculate. If she left the house of her own accord in the morning, she would have made the bed before doing so. And since Valessa wasn't there either, they were both at this point considered missing. The investigators flagged Vicki's bank account and learned that her ATM card had been used in the area since Jim had last seen her. They pulled the footage and saw that it wasn't Vicki using the card, it was Adam and John. Valessa had not been seen on the footage, so there was also concern for her welfare as well. The family waited to hear more news about where Vicki and Valessa were. They half expected a ransom note because why else would they have been abducted? The idea that either Valessa or Vicki had been hurt was just too much to consider. When news of the disappearances hit the media, tips started coming in. One tip came in from an anonymous caller who said that they had been in contact with Adam. According to this tip, Valessa was alive and with Adam, but Vicki had been killed. Adam told the caller that they hit Vicki, and when she was unconscious, he killed her. The caller didn't clarify if Valessa had run off with Adam willingly or if she was abducted. But what the police did know was that Vicki's bank card kept getting used, so they knew 3 days after Vicki disappeared that Adam and John, and probably Valessa, were on the run, moving along I-10 west, and they were likely in Vicki's van since that was still missing. Because they were getting updates on locations as the bank account was hit, they were always one step or one city behind. And that's how it went for 2 days. Then on July 2nd, someone used Vicki's bank card in Pecos County, Texas. The police back in Tampa reached out to the Pecos County sheriff, who headed out to I-10 to watch out for Vicki's van. He spotted it around noon. He pulled out and flipped on his lights, but the driver didn't pull over. Instead, he accelerated and tried to lose the sheriff. As the high-speed pursuit continued, one report says that the deputy fired at the vehicle's tires, and the driver lost control of the van before it came to a stop. The sheriff and deputy approached the vehicle and ordered everyone out. The people in the van, Adam, John, and Valessa, refused, so they ended up being physically pulled out, laid on the ground, and handcuffed. 2 different police cars took Adam and John to the county jail in Fort Stockton. They were purposely separated so they wouldn't have any time to get their stories straight. But what to do with Valessa was a judgment call. She was either a hostage or an accomplice, and she would be treated differently depending on which one she was. Nothing the sheriff saw or heard when they pulled her out of the van indicated to him that she was there against her will. So he placed her under arrest as well, putting her into a 3rd cruiser where she would then be taken to the courthouse before being sent to a juvenile facility. While Valessa was in the backseat of the police car, she asked the deputy why they were arrested, and he said it was because they were wanted in Florida in relation to a stolen vehicle. Valessa said it was her mother's van and she hadn't stolen it. Now, this particular deputy only knew that this was a stolen car arrest. He didn't know the whole story, so he didn't ask any questions about Vicki being missing or make any comment like that. The day after the high-speed chase and arrest, which was July 3rd, the investigators from Florida had made it to Texas to interview the 3. Valessa was up first. When they told her they were looking for Vicki, she said she did not know where her mom was. There was some back and forth with the detectives insisting they needed her help and Valessa continuing to insist she didn't know anything. That went on for about 10 minutes before they got Valessa to start giving them some actual information about what happened. She claimed not to remember all of the details since she had done LSD that night, but she said she remembered that Adam and John were in her bedroom and she and Vicki were in the kitchen arguing. During the fight, Valessa grabbed a knife and stabbed her mother once in the neck and twice in the back. There was so much blood that Valessa panicked and ran to her room. She told John and Adam what had just happened, and they went into the kitchen to clean up the blood for her as she was freaking out. They then put Vicki's body in a garbage can and then transported that to a dirt road where they were going to bury her down a trail. But they had some issues digging, so they left her body there until they could get back later to hide it better. Valessa's version of what happened that implicated her alone in the murder didn't withstand much questioning. She started stumbling when they pressed her for any details. She was asked how she was able to attack and overpower her mother, and she said that she pinned her down before stabbing her, which they didn't believe. Valessa was small. She was about 5'2", maybe 115 pounds. It seemed unlikely she would have been able to hold down her mother while also stabbing her. She was asked where she got the knife, and she said from a friend. She was asked about the size of the knife, and she didn't know. Now, where was the knife now? She threw it somewhere but couldn't remember where. All she seemed to remember was that it was her who killed her mother. Valessa wasn't questioned much longer because she started complaining about stomach pains, and they ended the interview to allow her to get a medical assessment. John was interviewed next, and he pretty much immediately confessed to being an accomplice and/or accessory. And when Adam was interviewed, he denied everything for about 10-15 minutes, but they played him clips of the recorded interviews with the other 2 and told him it would be better for him to tell the truth. The clips they played were definitely specifically chosen to make him think that the other 2 told everything, even though they actually told two very different stories. And that's when Adam also confessed. Neither his story nor John's story supported what Valessa said happened. So if we take Adam and John's initial confessions and put them together to figure out what happened, we can get into the details as best as we could possibly know. On the night of the murder, Adam and John did leave the house when they said, and they went to a Denny's restaurant. With Vicki thinking they were gone and Valessa was home in her room, Valessa snuck out and met up with Adam and John at the restaurant. They left to go buy some LSD, which they bought and used before going back to Denny's to sit at a table and decide what to do next that night. Valessa made a comment about how they should kill her mom. John said he thought it was a joke, but Adam jumped in to discuss ideas on how they could kill her and suggested injecting her with heroin, causing an overdose. The motive behind killing her was that they thought she was going to try to make Adam and Valessa break up. John said he thought it was all talk. He didn't think Adam would actually do anything like that. But then Adam said he knew where they could buy some heroin, but they needed a car to drive there, and Vicki just so happened to have a vehicle. The three went back to Valessa's house while Vicki was already in bed. Valessa snuck back in with John and opened the garage door, making sure Vicki didn't wake up. When she didn't, Valessa got the spare keys to the van and opened it. Adam got in and shifted the car into neutral, with Valessa and John pushing the car out to the street. They didn't want to make any noise that could possibly wake Vicki up. Once out of the driveway, Adam drove them to his friend's house, and he told his friend that he wanted enough heroin to, quote, take someone's ass out, while also making it look like an accident. The friend didn't have heroin at the time, but offered to sell Adam the syringe he would need, assuming he got his hands on heroin elsewhere, and Adam bought it. John said he still didn't think Adam would go through with anything at this point, even though he saw Adam try to purchase the heroin. But he also said that when he did think Adam was serious, he was worried Adam might turn on him if he tried to stop anything. The three drove back to Vicki's house, but they didn't pull up to the house because they were still worried about waking her, so they stopped the car down the street and walked up. They snuck into Valessa's bedroom and started to make their final plans. And Adam decided they could just skip using heroin. He asked Valessa if she had bleach in the house because they could use that plus air in the syringe to kill Vicki. Valessa went and got the bleach and a glass for Adam, who filled the syringe. With his pocket knife in hand, Adam and Valessa went into Vicki's room. They soon came back out, though, having woken Vicki up. It isn't clear how much Vicki saw before they managed to get out of her room and back into Valessa's, but she definitely knew something was up. She left her bedroom and knocked on Valessa's door, telling her to grab her sleeping bag. She was going to spend the rest of the night in Vicki's room. Whether she thought Valessa was sneaking out or she was sneaking someone in, Vicki was going to put a stop to it by keeping Valessa close. Adam hid the syringe and pocket knife in Valessa's room and handed Valessa her sleeping bag. After having told Valessa to go to sleep in her room, Vicki headed to the kitchen. Adam followed her down the hall. John told the police that it was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Suddenly, he said they heard choking and gagging noises, so he and Valessa ran to the kitchen. There, they found Adam holding Vicki in a chokehold as she struggled to get out of his grasp. When Adam saw Valessa and John standing there, he yelled for Valessa to go get the syringe, but she didn't know where he put it. He told Valessa to hold Vicki down while he went to go get it. Valessa did as she was told, and Adam ran back to the room and got the syringe from the closet where he hid it. He returned and tried to inject Vicki, who was still fighting back. It took several tries before he could get the syringe in her neck. According to Adam, he was only able to do it after Vicki lost consciousness from the chokehold. Then he and Valessa continued to hold Vicki down on the floor while they waited for her to die. But instead of dying, Vicki started to regain consciousness. Adam turned to John, who had already gone and gotten Adam's knife out of Valessa's room. John handed the knife to him and said, "Use this." Though John brought the murder weapon to Adam, he didn't want to stick around and see it being used. He went back to Valessa's bedroom and said he could hear Vicki calling out for help. Adam said that Valessa held Vicki's legs down while he stabbed her. He said he didn't know what was going through his mind, but he was tripping on the LSD, which he said fueled his rage. John told the police that things went quiet and Valessa returned to her room, with Adam coming in a short time later. Adam was holding the knife with his bloodied hand. Adam then went into the bathroom to wash his hands, and the three started smoking. They heard a moaning sound from the kitchen, and Adam made a comment about how Vicki just wouldn't die. He took the knife and left the room. Valessa and John sat on the bed, and John said he heard the sound of air escaping, which he believed was Vicki's last breath. He said that Adam told him that he stabbed Vicki a couple more times and tried to break her neck. Vicki's body stayed in the kitchen while the three sat in Valessa's room and talked about what to do next. They decided to bury Vicki's body in a wooded area, but first they needed to clean up the kitchen, which they did. Vicki's body was then put in a trash can, like Valessa had said, and they loaded the trash can, bloody evidence like towels, and shovels into Vicki's van, and then drove it about 5 miles from her house to a heavily wooded area. They found their path was blocked by a chain that kept the cattle fence closed, so they cut it and kept going. At the end of a dirt road, they stopped the van and unloaded the trash can, dragging it down a footpath. While Valessa waited in Vicki's vehicle, John and Adam found that digging a hole to bury her was harder than they expected. So they opted to put the trash can in some overgrowth, cover it with dried palm leaves, and then come back another time to bury her. They then went back to the house to find any money they could take. They ended up with some cash, as well as a few credit cards, and of course, that ATM card that gave away their movements. For the next 3 days after the murder, the three used Vicki's money to get a hotel in Ybor City, which is a historic district in Tampa. They blew through quite a bit of the money on drugs, the hotel room, food, and shopping. Adam and John got eyebrow piercings and tattoos as well, to the tune of about $600. During the time they were in Ybor City, based on witness statements, Valessa kept complaining that she didn't feel well while also trying to talk to Adam about when they were going to have a baby. The three also bought 20 bags of concrete and a bucket as they came up with a new plan. With Vicki's body inside a trash can, they could then fill it with concrete and dump it in the canal where it would, if their plan went right, sink to the bottom and never be found. They ended up not going through with this because Adam got a call from a friend. Vicki's disappearance was on the news, and they had named him and Valessa as people the police were looking for. They then decided they needed to get out of town, heading to Arizona first, and then the plan was to go up to Canada. They got as far as Texas. Both John and Adam drew maps for the police that would lead them to Vicki's body. Investigators followed those directions to the dirt road, and they found the cut chain from the cattle fence, and that let them know they were in the right place. When the investigators got to the end of the dirt road, there was a trail, again confirming they were in the right spot. They followed it for about 10 minutes when, deep in the woods, they found everything they needed. There were 2 shovels near some disturbed ground. There was a trash bag with towels, bleach, and blood in it. And of course, a little further down, and more covered up than everything else, they found the trash can containing Vicki's body. The autopsy concluded that she had been stabbed and the cause of death was blood loss. The defensive wounds on her body backed up the confessions that said that Vicki had fought back. The 3 confessed killers, Valessa, John, and Adam, were all charged with first-degree murder. As happens with co-conspirators, they were not allowed direct communication, though Adam and Valessa did what they could to get around that using a friend. This friend would sometimes do a 3-way call with both of them, allowing them to talk directly to each other. Other times, the same friend would record a call with Valessa and then play it for Adam and vice versa, so that they could get information back and forth. It didn't last long, though, before the jail found out about it and cut off their phone privileges. They then tried to communicate through hand gestures and mouthing words to each other at court hearings. So the judge ordered that all of their hearings be separated. So then Valessa came up with a code, and she tried to get letters out to Adam, or at least short messages. They would say things about how she wished she could be there for him and how she'll love him forever, even if he stops loving her. She wrote that she hoped they could continue their plans of getting married and starting a family, but if Adam decided to just pin everything on her and go free and have a family with someone else while she stayed locked up, she would be happy because she would give her life if it made Adam happy. And it seemed like Valessa did try to take the rap with that first statement. She said she killed her mother alone and that Adam and John only helped clean up, but that's not what Adam or John said. John pretty much put all the blame on Adam, removing himself from the kitchen as much as possible. Adam made it sound more like all three of them had a role, at least in his initial statement. He did end up recanting his confession when he sat and spoke with a reporter with WFTS News. He claimed that he and Vicki actually got along well and he would never hurt her. Then he gushed about Valessa being his soulmate and that she was all he had. Valessa's interview with the same reporter was similar, saying that they were going to spend the rest of their lives together. But she conceded that what happened to her mom wasn't supposed to happen, and she thought she deserved to go to prison to think about what she had done. But she still hoped to be back together with Adam eventually. It really seems like Valessa did not understand the reality of what was happening around her. She was waking up in pretrial detention thinking that this could possibly resolve in a way that would let them be together. While Valessa clung to hope behind bars, John was struggling much more. He experienced alopecia due to the stress, and even after he shaved his head, the bald patches were still noticeable. His attorney felt some urgency to get things settled for John for his overall well-being. Because John had only confessed to being there and handing Adam the knife, maybe he could turn prosecution witness against Adam, who did the stabbing, and Valessa, who at the very least held her mother down. Based on the evidence at the scene and the statements of all three defendants, John's story was plausible. So the state agreed on a plea deal. They offered him second-degree murder with a 25-year sentence on the condition he testified against the other two. The alternative, go to trial for first-degree murder and face the death penalty. John took the deal. On June 29, 1999, just about a year after the murder, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, grand theft, and grand theft auto. Adam was not offered any type of deal, as the state believed he was the primary aggressor. The defense did explore the possibility of using a voluntary intoxication defense to at least mitigate what he did due to his LSD use that night. Maybe it could either bring the charge down from first degree to second degree, or at the very least, spare him a death sentence. Because Adam was on LSD, he was saying that he acted the way he did because of a distorted perception about what was going on. For this defense to really get anywhere, though, the LSD would have had to inhibit his ability to form intent, which would be much harder to prove. The defense had Adam examined by a clinical psychologist, and if they hoped that he would throw them a bone, they would have been disappointed. The psychologist found that Adam exaggerated any symptoms of mental illness, and when he recounted the murder, he had details that showed his perception wasn't distorted and that he did have the ability to form intent. Adam went to trial in early November 1999, and the motive presented was that Vicki objected to the relationship between him and Valessa, and she was getting in the way of them being together. The defense decided to back away from the intoxication defense and instead fall back on what Valessa initially told the police. They conceded to the jury that Adam was involved, but it was Valessa who was the actual killer. He did help her after the fact, and he should be considered guilty of a lesser charge, but not first-degree murder. Unfortunately for the defense, Valessa's initial confession, the jury never heard it. It was deemed inadmissible as Valessa was not a witness in the trial, and it wasn't consistent with the evidence anyway. This initial confession of Valessa's was pretty much the only thing to back up Adam's new story that Valessa did it, because John did testify per the deal he made, and he put the knife in Adam's hand. The trial only lasted a few days before being handed over to the jury. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Adam guilty of first-degree murder, grand theft, and grand theft auto. They then moved to the penalty phase. He was facing life in prison or the death penalty, and this was a chance for the state to present the aggravating factors and the defense to present the mitigating ones. As for the aggravating factors, the victim impact statements were presented, and the prosecution told the jury that Adam had been on felony probation at the time he murdered Vicki, which showed his disrespect for the law. The defense presented evidence about Adam's unstable childhood, having his mother and other family members testify. They also had the psychologist testify in a limited manner, worried that if he told the whole story, like how he thought Adam was feigning mental illness, the jury would never spare his life. They pointed out his relatively young age, just 19, and argued that he had skills that could benefit other inmates in prison, giving his life purpose in making positive contributions if he was allowed to live. The defense also told the jury about the sentences the others got or would get. Valessa was under 18, so if she was convicted, she wouldn't get anything more than life with the possibility of parole. And John, he got 25 years. So was it fair and balanced to give Adam the death penalty while the other two would one day be released? By John's own admission, all three had been involved in planning the murder together, so why should one person be put to death when the other two would one day be free? The jury deliberated for 80 minutes, and in a split vote of 7-5, they recommended the death penalty. As we've covered before, Florida has gone back and forth on these types of sentencing recommendations. At first, a judge could impose a death sentence in this situation. Then it was changed that the judge could only impose death if it was a unanimous decision. And then within the last couple of years, it's back to the judge being allowed to decide in split decisions. At the time this case happened, the judge could give a death sentence even if the jury vote was split. The judge found there to be 3 relevant aggravating factors and 5 relevant mitigating factors. The aggravating factors were that the crime was committed while Adam was on felony probation. 2, the crime was heinous, atrocious, or cruel, which kind of makes it seem like any murder could fit into that. And 3, the crime was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated murder without any pretense of moral or legal justification. Again, that just sounds like any first-degree murder to me. As for the mitigating factors, they were that 1, Adam was under the influence of LSD at the time of the offense. 2, Adam had no prior violent convictions. 3, Adam had suffered hardships during his childhood. 4, Adam was young. And 5, Adam was a skilled writer and artist, which was something he could use to teach and improve the lives of other inmates. The judge found that while the number of mitigating factors was larger, the weight of the aggravating factors was still more. Adam Davis was sentenced to death on December 17th, 1999. Now, the next trial was Valessa's, and it was held in April of 2000. The state did not believe that Valessa was the primary aggressor and said so. Adam was the one who stabbed Vicki to death, but Valessa was just as culpable. For one thing, it was her idea, and she also held her mother down, knowing what Adam was going to do to her. The time in pretrial detention and the inability to communicate did put an end to Valessa and Adam's relationship by the time of her trial. So Valessa was not going to take the rap for him, and she had a new story. Her new version of events was that she wasn't even in the kitchen when her mother was killed. She was in her room. She admitted she should have gone in there and intervened or called for help or done something to save her. She said she hated herself for not doing so, but it was actually John and Adam who murdered Vicki. The defense was basically saying that John's testimony was a lie, and he was essentially reversing his role with Valessa's. Valessa's inaction that night and then her actions after the murder were because she was under the influence of an older and controlling boyfriend. John's testimony was pretty damning. He said that when they decided to kill Vicki in the Denny's restaurant, Valessa jumped up and down excitedly. And then after Vicki was dead, when they were hanging out in Ybor City, He said Valessa said she was glad they killed Vicki because now she was free. The jury deliberated for 2.5 hours before finding Valessa guilty of third-degree murder, as well as petty theft and grand theft. Only 3 states have a third-degree murder charge, and in Florida, it's defined as a person unintentionally killing another while committing or attempting to commit a nonviolent felony. Since they also found her guilty of the petty theft and the grand theft, I assume those are the nonviolent felonies they're using to justify this verdict. But with going with an unintentional murder conviction, it was clear they didn't believe Valessa intended for her mother to die. Other than an acquittal, this was the best outcome she could have hoped for. She was sentenced to 15 years for the murder and 5 years for grand theft. In December of 2013, after serving 15 years, Valessa was released at the age of 30. She has since gone on to have a family of her own, which one of Vicki's close friends told Bay News 9 that he was torn on. It was hard to see Valessa enjoy the life she helped take from her mother. But on the other hand, Vicki loved her daughter, and she would have wanted her to have a second chance. Because Adam was given a death sentence, he began a very long process of appealing his case. He argued that his initial confession should not have been admitted for a few reasons. 1, he was woken up at 5:30 in the morning for the interview, and 2, he was under the influence of LSD. However, this was refuted by his own statements that he slept for the majority of the time he was in police custody by that point, which was nearly 15 hours. And the effects of the LSD would have worn off in about 12. So unless he took LSD while he was asleep in a jail cell, he was sober enough to make this statement. His initial appeal was denied. He had more success with his 2017 appeal. In the 2016 decision in Hearst v. Florida, it found that it was unconstitutional for a judge to find aggravating factors after the jury made their recommendation. The jury has to make a finding on each fact that the judge relied on for sentencing because the defendant has a right to a jury of his peers. Making an overall recommendation for the death penalty and then the judge determining the aggravating factors wasn't good enough. While Adam was in the process of that appeal, John Wispel was released from prison in October of 2019. He didn't stay out of trouble for long. In June of 2020, he was arrested and charged after assaulting his girlfriend, and a condition of his bond was that he stay away from her, which he didn't do. In October, he rode his bike to the nail salon where she was, and he tried to get into the salon while calling her name. The next day, he rode his bike to Walmart and got within 100 feet of her, violating the terms of his release, so he was arrested. In March of 2021, he was found guilty on 2 counts of battery and violating pretrial release. He was sentenced to a year of probation and 29 weeks of a domestic violence program. He has since been charged with at least 1 probation violation after testing positive for marijuana. But now back to Adam and his appeal. While his conviction stood, his death sentence was overturned. The state had 2 options. They could hold a new sentencing hearing with a new jury and run things the way Hearst v. Florida outlined. Or they could just drop the death penalty and Adam would end up with a life without parole sentence. When the state looked at the mitigating factors that had been at play originally and the much lighter sentences of the other defendants and the fact that the jury had a 7-5 split anyway, they opted to just allow the sentence to convert down to life without parole. At the hearing where this sentence was formally handed down in May of 2021, Adam expressed remorse for what he did, and he apologized to the family, saying that Vicki had actually been quite kind to him. He said her loss was a great tragedy that never should have happened. And with the changing stories and the theories of what happened and the varying sentences between the 3 defendants, that's probably the only thing everyone can agree on. What happened to Vicki Robinson never should have happened, and her loved ones shouldn't have had to live the last 25 years without her.